My name is Victor Santoyo, and I am a senior sales consultant for security, part of the GoDaddy family. And today, what we're going to talk about are some of the things to be looking out for as we plow into the holiday season now, and specifically targeting tips on how to secure your online business. Of course, these are some of the things to be expected as a hotter topic of conversation, considering the fact that 27% of retail sales are going to be purely done by e-commerce by the end of 2026. And there's going to be some data that we'll dive into very quickly as to show the progression into the shift into online business. So knowing the proper steps to take place and the right approach for securing your online business is going to be very key as we go into this part of the year. Important things like security, the maintenance throughout the development process, and we're going to look at malware trends, things to look out for as we go through. So first things first, why is this key? Take a look at these numbers just from the last few years, right? And some of this is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, right? We're coming out of that now. But still, you're seeing a noticeable shift from 15% of total retail sales being done online in 2019 to now, where we're going up 21% from last year to 22% estimated this year. And this is a trend that will continue to grow. And this isn't specific to any one market. As you look here, you'll see that the percentage of retail sales coming from online business grows no matter the region. So whether you're in Latin America, North America, any part of Europe, you're going to see along those trends that there is a steady increase in how many people go online to make their purchases, whether for Christmas, for day-to-day usage, right? Just for groceries or household items. No matter what, this percentage is going to continue to grow, which means more and more people will visit your product, your online presence, and it's more key than ever to ensure that you're providing the best possible experience. So let's look at the keys to holiday success as we go into this year. Here's some of the things that we'll cover to help ensure that we're strengthening your e-commerce security posture. First things first is our security risk to online stores. We'll provide a sampling of the security risks in these cases. Next, we'll go into proactive security measures. What are the steps you can take? And we'll go through that as we look at each risk one by one. And of course, ongoing best practices. Some of these are things you've heard before, but at the end of the day, it's very important that you ensure that you are in the best position, not just to succeed for yourself or your team or the business, but also to ensure that you're putting yourself in the best position to maintain the trust from your customer base so that there isn't any distrust or doubts when your business name becomes the next one that says, hey, we've been hacked, data's been breached, etc. So let's look at some of these risks, right? What are they to your online stores? I'm not going to expect that everyone watching this is going to become a security expert overnight or even over the next 30 minutes. But being exposed to some of this terminology will be very key in your success, or at the very least, being able to identify potential issues or communicate with someone in the event that you do run into these actual problems. So first, malware. Malware is the most common way to gain access to e-commerce website. It's an overarching term, so it's a catch-all, but it covers a majority of infections that most of the online business owners face when they do get hacked. It covers viruses, worms, Trojan horses, ransomware, spyware. So these are some of the terms you may have heard before. Malware can do a number of things. It can erase data, can infect your website, can even hold your site hostage in that ransomware attack that I just touched on. So one thing is malware can come from a variety of different sources, but most commonly it comes as a result of downloading an infected file from the website. Now, something to keep in mind. Most malware attacks are automated. Very few sites are actually targeted specifically to create an infection, meaning, hey, why would, like, people ask, why is it me? My site's very small, doesn't produce a lot of traffic. Why was I targeted in this particular case? Well, it's not specifically that you were targeted. You were part of a larger canvas from an automated script that were just trying to exploit a number of different domains, a number of which may not have even been e-commerce shops. Maybe some of them were, But at the end of the day, what they were looking at is an exploit in your code. So one of the things to ensure that you avoid the potential issue with malware presenting on your website is to run regular, security scans and ensuring that those types of infections don't become present on your website. Another simple addition is a CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA can also help you quickly distinguish between what may be an authentic, legitimate visitor and those that are trying to exploit, right? Part of another phrase is botnet, automated attempts to send fake visitors and see what's susceptible or whatnot. Okay. SEO spam is another trend, keeping in mind. So one of these things that we want to keep in mind is that SEO spam as part of malware is hidden within headers or somewhere on the site that helps other sites rank up within Google. So while you may not see anything, one of the things is that black hat SEOs, it's also known, are using your site to link to their site so that their malicious site goes up in the rankings, right? So this is kind of a way to piggyback off of your success, but could also ultimately punish you as well. Now, the other thing that's probably most common as well in terms of malware that's growing in popularity, right? And you may see me slip up in the slide here, is e-skimming, credit card stealing, credit card skimming. All of these are synonymous with each other, but essentially this is credit card stealing malware, right? No different than some of those things you've heard about, hey, be careful with your card at the gas pump, right? There's often a reader there to take information, grab your numbers and all that. And then lo and behold, you get called, your card has been hit with a fraud alert or has been used or attempted at some other stores or retail and convenience stores, and you get into trouble. E-skimming is essentially the same principle. Someone's been able to install malware that grabs the card information as you're making an online purchase, and then lo and behold, that person has it. So one of the things is that you would think actually, as we go into the holiday season, right? You're making all the Christmas purchases and all that, that you would see more e-skimming, credit card skimming in November or December. But in fact, the risk is actually present at all times of the year. There's actually no noticeable increase or dip or ebb and flow in this. So they're just as common in April, August, right around Thanksgiving, right around Black Friday and Cyber Monday shopping season. So this isn't something to keep in just in the back of your mind for the next couple of months. E-skimming is an exploit that allows hackers to inject that code into the checkout page of a website, and that's very valuable. Again, think about the graph before, how much we're doing just day-to-day purchasing, next overnight shipping and all that. This is an opportunity for attackers to continue to exploit people using either weak code or a fast, quick way to get online and start pushing their own product. And for those that skip steps or are not careful, this is something that can unfortunately land certain sites to be blocked, put on a block list because they're presenting a risk of e-skimming, which of course, if you're presenting the risk of your credit card or of a customer coming to you and having credit card information stolen, that will put your reputation on the line, right? And that's going to be something very hard to have to earn back. So in addition to all that, one of the things you want to make sure is that you want to protect your e-commerce site by following some of the actions that the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency recommend. Quite a bit of mouthful, but basically here is the list of things you should be doing proactively: and performing regular updates to your payment software, installing patches to the payment platform vendors that you're using, right? Are you ensuring that the software and the integrations are up to speed or up to the latest all the latest standards and whatnot. So making sure that's up to speed, implementing code integrity checks. Again, we're going back to monitoring your code and showing that everything is done correctly. Having antivirus software updated and checking your local machines in every environment that you have. And of course, you are PCI DSS compliant. All right, we'll go into some of what that means or the consequences of not being compliant in a little, but you want to make sure that you are, right? It's very key, of course, if you're going to be running an online business. And if, again, you want to monitor your web logs. I mentioned you're not supposed to be a security expert to look through all the logs and understand exactly what every line, every attempt makes, supposed to make sense to you, but at the very least have them so that if you do have either a security, you know, point person in your team available, or otherwise when you have a vendor come through to help, as we do often, and you have the logs to share, then you do have someone who is proficient in this to be able to understand them and help you out in a pinch. So just something to keep in mind. Another common attack is known as cross-site scripting, abbreviated it's XSS. Cross-site scripting is essentially a web security vulnerability that allows a bad actor to exploit users' interactions with a vulnerable application. So that was a mouthful. Essentially, what it says is that an attacker can pose as a user and carry out specific actions that any other user is able to perform and can access some of that user's data. So again, that data is valuable commodities when it comes to to hackers online these days, whether it's credit card data, it could be personal data, it doesn't have to necessarily be specific to my e-wallet, so to speak, but some of that data that you do have, addresses, phone numbers, names, those are valuable because it could even lead down the path to identity theft in other cases. SQL injection, or SQLI, as you'll see abbreviated as well, is another common form of malware. This is a common exploit in which they use a malicious SQL code to manipulate the backend databases. And again, with the goal of accessing information that, of course, was not intended to be displayed or shared or made public. So when you hear about some of these large scale data breaches, right, the type of things that I mentioned you don't want associated with your brand, your company, your reputation, the chances are likely that it was some form of a SQLI exploit, right? Something like this that happened that allowed it. Let's look at what some of these things may look like in the code if one's curious. Something like this makes it easy for an attacker to, escape quotes and inject more SQL operations, siphon more information. So someone like this is actually allowing an attacker to log in with an account of their choice. And if the account creation process is pretty rudimentary in terms of, hey, this is a one initial last name kind of thing that's accepted, this makes it very easy for accounts to get hijacked. So little things like this can have massive implications. And we'll dive in again at the end in terms of what are the actual real consequences, right? What could this actually mean for me? Well, we'll dive into that as well. Ransomware. I touched on this, right? Ransomware is something where your site is held hostage. You're likely going to see something like this. It can affect entire organizations, not just an online business. Universities often get hit with this as well, pretty commonly, actually. So it's important for you as a business to educate yourself in the best practices to ensure that something like this is prevented, right? So this has been listed under the FTC as a resource to help businesses reduce their attacks risk, meaning it's becoming more prevalent. So it's not something specific to e-commerce, right? But I'm including it because at the end of the day, it's a hot topic. And the more this becomes prevalent, perhaps as an online business, all of a sudden your site essentially gets held at ransom. It's not available. And if you're off on a holiday trip, but a site that you're expecting to run 5-6 figures in business is suddenly not being able to present itself to your customer base, it's fatal, right? So during the holiday season, it's especially important to protect your e-commerce site from ransomware, not just because of the loss of traffic or the revenue, but of course, it's your site's down, right? And this is going to force business owners to have to pay either twice as much in the time to get someone to fix it, to decrypt this, in cases like this where you might have to succumb to whatever amount of Bitcoin or amount they're asking for in order to release your site back. So any moment, time, time is money, as they say. You don't want to be stuck in a case where you're trying to either spend the time decrypting this key or otherwise just having to figure out how to pay it out. And you're just doubling your losses on top of everything else, right? So proactive measures. As we go through this part of the webinar, obviously for a lot of you, if you've been following the webinar series, you've seen me talk before on some of this stuff from the start of the year and over the course of the last few years. You're going to see a lot of the same notes being hit here, and that's okay. It's okay to be reminded by design because a lot of these things are just not things that were used to doing on a day-to-day basis, unless you're in this specific industry. And in reality, if you're watching this, you're likely not, and that's fine. But something that can be overlooked doesn't mean that it should be. You should follow up with it. So some of the ways that often people are going to be reminded are always going to be the same way people tell you to lock your doors, make sure your windows are closed and you're doing all the right things. You'll often get those email alerts to reset your password for your phone or other things. And in the same line of thinking, going over these things in terms of being proactive are going to be just as key. So from a monitoring perspective, right, making sure that there are a variety of apps and tools that can help in helping you monitor how your users are accessing your web pages. Google Analytics offers real-time user activity visualization, which is really cool, and all that stuff. But monitoring your assets in the way that GoDaddy's website security services do, they offer daily scans that include looking for threats like malware and defacements and some of these things that we touched on, SQL injections and cross-site scripting. So making sure that we're doing some of those things is key, but also asking ourselves some pretty simple questions. Do I really need this in terms of the software that you're running? It might be a backlog of things that you hadn't thought about in terms of, are we going to proceed with this particular app or project or installation or whatnot? If you're utilizing WordPress, how many plugins are active versus not, or you haven't used in a long time? Perhaps it's good to get, if you don't use it, lose it kind of thing. Second question, of course, is if you're utilizing a vendor or let's say you're on the plugin marketplace and you're looking for a new tool, something cool to help, improve the user experience. Well, does that developer or that vendor have a plan if new vulnerabilities are disclosed, right? If they're paying attention to the security type of details, then that's a really good, pro on their list in terms of someone you should be working with, because they're taking something like that seriously, which means you can entrust them to make sure that if something serious does happen, they're as quickly on top of it as you're striving to be. Are these developers, prioritizing security in terms of releasing notes on patches, things that they realize were bugs or whatnot? It doesn't have to be security specific, although it should be, but seeing them regularly update is going to be key. And of course, do you or your team have a plan to monitor and apply these updates as they become available, right? Sometimes it's easy to see, oh yeah, a bunch of these things need updates, but sometimes it's really key to make sure, because on top of staying on top of the latest updates in terms of the cool features that may become available, sometimes these updates that you get aren't always going to be about performance or efficiency or features. A lot of these updates include either minor or major security inclusions, right? You'll see them in the notes for your phone app, for your computer desktop. So these are some of the things that are key, because again, of these tactics are changing all the time. So pay attention when certain software or plugins that you use for your e-commerce website become available, because you do not want to have to expose yourself unnecessarily. Minimize the risk of being caught within a window of opportunity for what's known as zero-day attacks. In other words, the moment that a new exploit or vulnerability is announced, then all of a sudden, developers are working on creating a patch if there isn't one already. So again, making sure that window of opportunity is as narrow as possible. And again, this goes with not just plugins, as I may be mentioning because they're popular, but core themes, other extensions, other software, not just on your website, but on your hosting environment, right? The server and all these things. So carefully review updates when they're released, ensure that they're being implemented so that this does not affect not just the functionality of the websites, but of the availability of your website, right? So let's keep that in mind. And again, some of these tools that you may be using could also be helpful in terms of providing real-time file change monitoring, which is also key. The last thing you'd want are very key files, some of which can be listed here as part of this core list of files that I have on my website. You don't want the new size to show as 0, because then that indicates the files have been zeroed out. They're gone. They've been emptied, and that's going to kill the core functionality of your website. Again, update. whether it's the plugin, as you may see through my WordPress site. I leave it here as is in design because I want you to see how often it's easy to visualize when the updates are coming if you're going through WP admin, if you're a WordPress user. So making sure that you're going through here is very key. So that way you can be in the best position to succeed, right? And I'll touch on this again. Server-side platforms, your hosting, all these things can often be mitigated by just simply checking on this. The last aspect, of course, is using strong, unique passwords, right? You may have the best, tools available for you, but at the end of the day, sometimes some of these things are occurring because you're using weak access points. So maybe you have a website firewall, which is another great opportunity to improve your security in terms of having a defensive layer in place to protect against threats. But you may have that firewall in place with all the best virtual patching capabilities that there is to offer, which Security's technology does in empowering GoDaddy's website security platform. But on top of that, you may be doing your absolute worst in having really weak password management. It may undermine some of these other security measures you have in place in terms of monitoring, and doing regular updates. For example, you could be the subject of what's known as a dictionary attack. In other words, you may have a simple password as garden because you have gardening, as part of like your business, e-commerce business, right? So you may sell gardening tools, and mulch and all this kind of stuff. And it's great, but when you go online to access your admin, your password might be garden123 as an example, and that is not the best password, right? But that's very easy, something that can be very susceptible. So making sure that you're using a tool, say like LastPass, which I use personally, to generate very long, complex passwords underneath is going to be key. On top of that, the really cool thing about a password manager, like a LastPass, although there are others like KeyPass and some others, is that all of the passwords that you create, which can be unique to every access point you have, FTP, hosting, domain registrar, and amongst other things, your email, on social media and all that, is that all of these unique passwords are then locked by a master password. So then you have one main password that is easier to keep it, to remember, although it should still be complex in its construction. But that one password unlocks everything else underneath. And there's some, good 2FA provisions in place, right? You're using Google Authenticator to ensure that you're the right person accessing these things. So again, data is a very big thing now. So the last thing you want to do is get caught with something as simple as a weak password that's absolutely going to undermine all the other efforts you're making around security for you as a business owner. So make sure you're using a long passphrase or a sentence instead of a word. Of course, don't use common words, use alphanumeric substitutes, for example, like instead of S's, you use the simple sign for money and all that. The things that are easy for you to remember, but using special characters are a good way to, strengthen that security on the password complication. And of course, something that's unique to you. And sometimes it could just be a favorite word, a funny word, something that's only you, but not specifically very obvious. And of course, don't reuse the same password across different accounts. If you're using the same password for your email, for your bank account, and for your hosting, that's a big no-no, right? You don't want them to presume that you're using the same password across different places where it's obviously may have an account, and then they're able to access all of those other things as well. So just something to keep in mind on that front. SSL encryption. Now, of course, having an SSL certificate is going to be the number one thing if you're going to be maintaining a PCI compliance, like I touched on earlier, right? If you're going to be doing any type of selling online, you have to maintain those standards. And one of those standards is having an SSL certificate. It's a foregone conclusion, especially since Google's been flagging on this since 2018 or so. And the biggest thing about encryption is it's not so much that SSL certificates are going to protect your site. That's not the goal for those things. SSL certificates are primarily done to ensure that any information that's transferred from a customer's web browser, their computer, my phone, wherever I'm accessing your website, is then transferred safely in an encrypted fashion back to the web server for your online business, right? So when I'm putting in my name, my address, my billing details, right, card information, all that, that they are safely being sent. Because what we do not want is someone in the middle taking that information, like I touched on earlier, right, with the e-skimming thing, essentially getting that out. Whether you're the consumer or the online business, encryption is key to building trust. PCI compliance, of course, is a requirement, but just one of the biggest things as well with having a certificate is the role it also plays with your SEO ranking, right? So while the certificate, of course, will encrypt all the information submitted, it's just the biggest thing. You cannot imagine someone who may have spent countless years building up their ranking, building up their trust, and then allowing something like, even maybe you did have a certificate on and then it expired and then it didn't allow for your customers to have that safety net in terms of their process, information being sent on. So one of the things I would really key on, especially, is GoDaddy's managed SSL program. Yeah, so their solutions are a great way to ensure they can get ahead of a headache like this, and so that way you can focus on the surge of sales more than anything else. Because again, you don't want to get caught in a position where you have to remember your certificates that say due to expire, because these things are not, indefinite. They do have a date at which they expire. And they can take care of that for you. Or if there are SSL related errors or things that can be remedied, right? Mixed content warnings and stuff like that. So again, encryption is really key. It's important to have. You want the green padlock there. You want to be able to build that trust so you don't have any issues. You don't want to be seeing this whenever you're going online to make a purchase, right? Because Google's going to tell you, every browser is going to tell you, hey, not secure. Are you sure you want to proceed? Well, if there's even a doubt, or let's say in the process of a good experience, you don't want to slow anyone down by making them second guess or think twice. So again, make sure you have both your certificate in place, and if not, something like GoDaddy's managed SSL solution is going to be a great remedy to ensure that everything is done correct, right? Be secure, have this done, so that way that when the customers come to your website, they see that padlock and everything is fine. Okay. Now, I touched on the fact that SSL encryption, of course, is going to be specifically designed around protecting and encrypting data. And I touched on PCI compliance, but GDPR is another major regulation in Europe. And their big thing is simply not just simply protecting against anything that's specific to cardholder data, which is what PCI is focused on, right? PCI will say anything related to the customer's, primary account number, expiration dates, stuff like that is the minimum there. GDPR is looking for any data at all that will personally identify that person. So meaning name, gender, location, social identity of these things, right? So anything that can personally identify me for me is something that has to be properly encrypted. So this is just beyond some of the things that can be, punished under PCI, stuff. And we'll go in that a little bit. But GDPR, if you're operating in Europe or from Europe, is going to be another major thing you're going to have to keep in the back of your mind to ensure your compliance and you don't, break any rules or regulations and stuff like that, right? So again, I'll recap some of the things that can happen if it's not done correctly. The certificate's not installed correctly yet. Yeah, there's a redirect failure. Perhaps there's warnings and errors that are propping up. Another thing, of course, is simply a mismatch, making sure that it's validated to appropriate domain so it keeps those errors off your sites. If you're not sure at all, again, find a vendor that will help. GoDaddy's managed SSL program can absolutely help in this case. Now, what are the consequences? What are really some of the things that can go south if I don't do some of these things? If my site does suffer a small infection, or if some of my data does get breached? Well, according to IBM, a data breach specifically associated to the US will often cost twice as much as a global average. So if you're operating at the US, that's pretty alarming. And for the 12th year in a row, the US does still hold the title for the highest cost of data breach. What does that cost? Well, look at the bottom there, right? 9.44 million US dollars is the average cost of a data breach, right? And of course, globally, if we're doubling that, it's still over $4 million in terms of what the cost is of a data breach, no matter where you are, right? Europe, Latin America. So if you're operating out of any of these regions, these are millions of dollars in terms of the consequences. Because one of the things you will realize, and I'll go back a slide to highlight this, in terms of GDPR and PCI, is that each of these have their own fine system that will stack on top of each other. These two entities operate independently. So in reality, if you're fined for breaking PCI compliance because of a data breach and things like that, and you're operating out of Europe, you will automatically also be, of course, not in compliance with GDPR. And there's a separate fine system for that. So that's why often what you'll see is these numbers completely skyrocket because there are just too many things in, too many other layers in place in terms of the fines, on top of the costs of recovery, hiring a vendor. There's going to be some type of analysis done in terms of forensics, in terms of seeing what happened and where it came from, beyond the returns you may have to make because, of course, people's cards are being used, maliciously or whatnot, fraud attempts. So many different layers to this onion. It could be it could be its own session on this kind of stuff. But these are the real types of consequences that can often take place. So be conscious of that. This is something that's really key here. So let's review, right? What are the best practices? What are the things we can do? Again, regularly test your site for vulnerabilities. Make sure you have monitoring software in place. Be proactive about your ongoing security training. Essentially, just make sure you have a list of things you're going over with you and your team so that you're in the best position to succeed. Checking, of course, that your site is always looked at in terms of a QA perspective, not just to say, hey, look, it looks fine. All the images load, the menus are working, nothing's broken, but also to make sure that the site isn't going to, let's say, when you click a link, download a malicious file on your computer and the malware hasn't been introduced. They can often be very, subtle. Security apps, make sure that you have not just the tools to scan, identify vulnerabilities, but the tools to protect you, right? A website application firewall. We didn't go too much into that just for the sake of time, but having a firewall in place to automatically block these threats so you don't have to think about it is going to be just as important as anything else we've touched on today. So if you don't have a firewall in place, GoDaddy website firewall is a great solution. Otherwise, there are all kinds of great vendors out there, security included, that can provide you a great, remedy for, not having to sit there and create all your new custom rules and policies for that situation. And of course, update all your scripts and applications. Use strong passwords, make an inventory of what users you have across all your accounts, delete those that either are no longer working with you or perhaps that don't need that much type of administrative access. And of course, run scans as regularly as you can. And with that, I know this was a lot, but I hope these are some of the things that you can take to your team. And of course, know for yourself, for not just this season, but as a touchdown throughout the year. It's kind of top of mind now because, of course, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and the holidays. But the risk of these types of, data infiltrations and all that, extractions attempts and all that are just as key now as they'll be in February, as they'll be into the spring. So please keep these in mind. But with that, thank you for your time. And truth be told, hopefully you guys have a great holiday season. And I hope everything goes well. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.